Hello everybody, I'm Dr. Glenn Harrison and welcome to this segment of Why. This is where we answer some of the most common health related questions and really answering the question to why these disorders happen, why this dysfunction is going on. So this week we're talking about hormones, everything about hormones. I'm going to introduce concepts that you can apply to any gland and therefore any hormone. So if you have been diagnosed with hormonal imbalances or feel you have hormonal imbalances, or just hormonal problems, this is what you want to learn. So this is the place you want to be. So first off, to understand hormones, the major concept I'm going to explain is hormones. The function starts in the brain. Okay, so if we talk about the thyroid, for example, the brain has to stimulate the thyroid gland or any gland, because we can replace the thyroid with the ovaries or testes or adrenal glands. So the brain stimulates the gland and then the gland makes the respective hormone. In this case, the thyroid makes thyroid hormone. And then the thyroid hormone has to jump on a transport mechanism, or a taxi, that's what I like to call it. It jumps on the taxi and travels to the tissue that it wants to activate or turn on. And the thyroid and many hormones go to multiple tissues, but the thyroid, one particular, is it activates scalp tissue, hair follicles, to make hair. So that's the thyroid, but it has to, when it gets to that tissue, it has to activate a button on the tissue. This button is called a receptor. Okay, so that's the flow of it. And I'm going to repeat it with a little drawing I did here, so hopefully it makes sense. So there's a little bit of a reflection. So the gland, or I should say the brain stimulates the gland. And in the case I used was the thyroid, but you could replace that gland with testes or ovaries or anything you want. And then the gland makes the hormone. The hormone jumps on a taxi so it can transport to the tissue it wants to activate. In this case, it's traveling to the scalp tissue. The taxi, or the hormone, has to jump off the taxi to activate the tissue. This is really important to note. So it jumps off the taxi and then it activates the button or the receptor on the scalp. That's it right over here. Once it activates that button, then the scalp turns on and has hair growth. But again, you can replace this gland with any gland in the body and the respective hormone. Okay, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. So where do the problems lie? Because now we have the basic concept, we've got to understand what's going on if there's a problem. The problem could be anywhere in this chain, this flow of information. So sometimes the problem I've seen clinically is where people have a lot of brain fog, can't concentrate, start memory impairment, all of these things for whatever the reason. The brain can be too weak that will see other symptoms that it can't stimulate the gland. It can't stimulate the thyroid or can't stimulate the ovaries or the testes or the adrenal glands. And then the gland isn't able to make its hormone. Sometimes the gland is the problem. Sometimes the immune system can decide to start damaging the gland, then it can't perform. So that'd be autoimmune conditions. Sometimes if the gland is like a muscle. So if you don't use it, you lose it. And the most common cause for glands to not being used is if there's an external hormone coming into the body. This could be in the form of contraceptives, birth control. It could be bioidentical hormones to offset the symptoms of postmenopause and bone density and all of these things. And it could be even like in the bodybuilder world, they're using a lot of testosterone. So if you add an external hormone into the body, the brain doesn't stimulate the gland, and therefore the gland starts to shrink. And then you become dependent on those hormones for life. So the same reason why young girls, they're on a contraceptive, they can't get pregnant right away because they're usually their ovaries start to lose their function. Sometimes it can come back, sometimes it can't. So the gland can be a problem. Then the other thing is this taxi. This taxi is needed to transport hormone, but the taxi sometimes, or the number of taxis go up with the amount of estrogen in the body. So if you have more and more estrogen in the body, you have more and more taxis. And this is a problem because if there's too many taxis, the hormone sits on the taxi and won't get off the taxi to activate the tissue. So that can be a taxi problem. And that'll be more with external hormones, bioidenticals, and things like that. And then over here, this little button, this isn't a very important button, this is the receptor. The receptor is extremely sensitive and fragile. So if you have too much hormone in the body, again, the synthetic hormones, the bioidentical hormones, the contraceptives, if you, or even testosterone with bodybuilders, if you have too much of that hormone, the hormone jumps off and wants to push that button to activate the tissue. So the button becomes overwhelmed. This is where the button becomes broken, also known as resistant. And one thing you may have heard of is insulin resistance. That's where diabetics are on a lot of insulin, and then they need more and more and more over time, because it's natural, it's non-natural quantities of insulin, and there's so much insulin in here, it's pushing the button, and it breaks the button, and then you need more and more insulin to have the same response to the tissue. So, but there are ways of fixing the button. The first thing is you have to clear out a lot of the hormone, and that's the liver's job. So the liver is the big organ. So as I mentioned, through all of this, very seldom are hormonal problems due to too little of hormone. In most cases, it's an excess causing these problems. So that's kind of that's thyroid function in a nutshell, and you can apply that to any different tissues and any corresponding hormone. So the liver is a big player. But ultimately, the thyroid, all of these hormones, if you think there's a problem, they've got to be tested and then balanced accordingly. But that's how it works. So with that being said, I'm Dr. Glenn Harrison. I hope that was helpful. Share it, comment on it. I know you might have questions. I'll get to those questions, so you can always put a question below. And stay tuned next time, and we're going to be jumping into a new topic and answering some of your more questions to the whys. So with that being said, have a great night.